Well, we're here with the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. Today, we're actually at the 2025 PDP here in Madison, Wisconsin. Will, you are actually a member of the board advisor? How do I say that?
So I do legal work for PDP. So General Counsel, I think, is the formal title. But basically, I just give away free legal work. So I'm happy to do it. It's a wonderful organization to be part of, and they do so many good things for the dairy community.
Yeah, so lots of good things happening here at PDP today and tomorrow. But Will, we've been able to carve a little time to catch up as we do every month.
Yep.
And what I've asked you to share this month is something that I know relates to a lot of dairy farm families out there all over. And it's because family is hard, right?
Yep.
And we all know that there's challenges that come up as we're working with our family members. And something that has come up in conversations I've had, I'm curious if this has come up in your conversations. I think really the root challenge here is we have multi-million-dollar family farming businesses. And if as a parent, we're questioning if our children have the capacity to handle the pressure, the decisions, the business, and be able to make those sound decisions, we may not have 100% confidence, or maybe you're a sibling that doesn't have that confidence. So at the end of the day, what do we do with these scenarios to protect the business and protect our families? Will, am I hitting something that you've ran into?
So it's frequent enough, we call it the Cousin Eddie situation. So if anyone has ever seen Christmas Vacation, their Cousin Eddie is just kind of a nincompoop, but he's still part of the family. And so what happens is you hit it spot on. Running a dairy or any farm operation, especially big ones, these are multi-million-dollar operations, and you can't have Cousin Eddie at the helm, but you also can't just throw Cousin Eddie out either. You still got to be at the dinner table. You still have to navigate. And in many situations, people who are the Cousin Eddie, they don't have really the other opportunities off the farm. So then just by virtue of their personality or lack of personality or whatever it might be, they end up growing up on the farm and then staying on the farm. So it becomes a situation, especially where you have parents, generation one, they're dealing with two different scenarios. It's either they have no successor, but Cousin Eddie or the son or the daughter that's not exactly the best person to be taking over this operation. Or it's a situation where you have multiple members of generation two, so kids, along with Cousin Eddie. And it becomes complicated in both of those scenarios in terms of how to deal with it. And we have tools. So when we meet with clients, we certainly have tools that we use to deal with both. The first one I talked about, so this is where you have mom and dad, and they have a child, usually a son, that, has been on the farm, works on the farm, but cannot be entrusted to run the farm. That scenario is actually easier to navigate than the other scenario. So on that scenario, what we typically will do, usually the parents will they have somebody else. They'll have like a dairy herd manager. They'll have someone that's a non-family member that's running the farm. And so we have to plan for what happens, what's the future of the farm. And in a lot of times what we will do in those situations is we will set things up so that when mom and dad pass away, the farm goes into a trust for the benefit of the child, but that trust is not controlled by the child, meaning the farm is protected, it's preserved, they can continue to work, the child can actually continue to receive economic benefits, but they have no direct ability to dictate the control of the farm. So it allows mom and dad to frankly manage from the grave. And that creates a situation because usually in that scenario, we actually will have other people. It might be family members, it might be grandchildren, it might be nieces or nephews that are looking to come into the farm. And so we can bake in some provisions to allow them the ability to do so. But we are ensuring that we're not just handing over the keys to the kingdom, knowing full well that it's like handing over the keys to a 14-year-old to your Corvette. That car is going in the ditch. But that's one way we can set it up. So we can provide an opportunity for that child to continue to farm and to continue to be on the farm and for the farm to continue on, but not hand over the keys directly.
So in that scenario, you're saying that that child is financially and futuristically taken care of.
Correct.
They have an income that they can depend on, something that's set aside for them. But then what happens to the managerial decisions
Yep.
and the day-to-day business operations?
So that's the complicated part, because you're going to have to ask someone, and it could be a sibling, a brother that owns another farm down the road, or it could be a friend or a business advisor or a group of business advisors to basically come in and serve as what would be seen as like a board of directors almost. And they provide their business advisors or their trustees of the trust. And they provide oversight and guidance and control to ensure that things stay on the tracks. We get this a lot, is actually you'll have the child is actually very competent. They're very competent to run the business. They know what they're doing. If all things being equal, they could probably run the business. But there's substance abuse issues, so alcoholism, drugs, gambling. That's a big one. And the concern is that although they have the business acumen and the agricultural acumen, the intelligence and the background to do it, if given the opportunity, they, again, will run it into the ground. So when we set these trusts up, we can do so in a manner so that we give them as much leash as we want to. So it could be, you run the day-to-day, you're in charge of these things, but you're not allowed to go to the bank and withdraw more than $10,000. Or you're not allowed to go out and buy or sell equipment or cattle without consent of the trustee or the farm advisors or whoever it is. It provides oversight without direct interference. In other situations where it's really the child works on farm, maybe they milk cows or they drive tractor, whatever it might be, but they don't manage. They're not involved in the business. That gets a little more complicated, because then we have to have a situation where what are we going to do? And what we've actually done, and what we're seeing more and more of, is neighboring farms providing management services. So it's almost like the farm gets rented out. And what I mean by that is you might have a neighboring dairy that's already got 1,000 head operation, and they will come in and take over management and control of your dairy. And they don't necessarily acquire anything, they just run it, and in exchange they get to essentially keep all the profits, with the understanding that the child is employed. And so they find a place for the child. So there are a lot of business tools that we can use to again, provide for the continuation of the farm, to provide for a livelihood, but it just depends on the person and how much management from the grave mom and dad or whoever want to have.
So as you talk about this, Will, this is something that you run into more and more?
For sure. And I've got, so less on that side, where it's just a single child, there's not a successor otherwise. Where we see it more is on the second type, which is you have multiple children or family members that are the second generation, so people our age. And as part of that, you have the cousin Eddie, you have that one. And we see it a lot where you have one brother, they partners, they run the farm. And one brother has a child that is really up and coming in the dairy. They're active in organizations like PDPW. They're really forward-thinking, progressive kind of farmers. And then other brother has a son that's just kind of a nincompoop. And how do we balance that? How do we manage that? Because first of all, there's nothing stopping this brother from just transferring his ownership to nincompoop. And then that means you're setting this up for failure. So in those circumstances, that's where we come across it more. And the good news is, if you're dealing with this at home, for instance, usually we can set things up where it becomes more psychological. It's really nincompoop. All he cares about is he gets a salary, it's money and a nice truck and a title. And as long as they get that, they're content. They just want kind of their creature comforts. So it's less about selling it to him, and it's more about selling it to dad, getting dad to recognize that it is not in the farm's best interest that his son or daughter be in a position where they can control the destiny of the farm. And so that requires more of the two brothers having candor with each other about what does this look like. I've got one, and it's an example in Darlington, a situation where it's that dynamic I just described. And it actually is not, the conversations are not going well. And in that circumstance, what now we're actually looking at doing is splitting the operation.
Okay.
We're just going to say, we're not going to continue on together. We're big enough. We think we can split this up and go our separate ways. And that's because the dad with the son, that's the up-and-comer, the son in particular recognizes that he's not going to be able to partner with this person. And it's like a shotgun marriage. It's just not going to work. So best to just separate amicably than to wait for the big blow up and then the nasty divorce. So again, sometimes there isn't a silver bullet solution. Sometimes the solution is just to say, how do we separate before it gets really bad?
Yeah. And as you talk about these scenarios and the way to mitigate around them, really, it comes back to having conversations in the first place, right? Because to get to that point where you either possibly separate, or going back to some of the scenarios you laid out before, where maybe it's bringing in a board of directors to essentially make management decisions. Those things require a lot of planning and a lot of careful defining of who are the players in the game and what does this future look like. But I just have to wonder how hard that conversation can be to get everybody on board with moving forward on some of these scenarios. How do you go about having that conversation to get everyone on the same page with the betterment of the business and its future?
I mean, it's one part legal, one part tax, one part family counselor. Realistically, I feel like a social worker sometimes. And I'm a big advocate when we're talking about any sort of farm planning, but especially when we're talking about multiple parties, right? Family units, whatever you want to describe it, is having one-on-one conversations. Farmers inherently don't like to be put around a table and told, share your feelings. That's generally goes over like a fart in church. It's not particularly effective. So instead, what we do is I'll say, okay, I'm going to meet with each family unit, and sometimes I'm going to meet with just mom and dad, and then I'm going to meet with son, and I'm going to meet with whoever. And we have conversations. We talk through things. And I will typically, so like when I get brought into the equation, usually it's after a couple of years of feet dragging and stalled communication and just this reluctance to really face the reality of the situation. So I'll usually get a phone call, and it will be from a frustrated somebody in the ecosystem, and they'll say, here's what's going on. And I'll say, all right, well, there's a couple of things. One, I'm happy to help, but everyone involved in the process has to be committed to actually working with me. Because if one person is just like, I don't want to deal with this, then we're kind of dead on arrival. It's just not going to work. But then I say the second thing is we're going to meet one-on-one, and I'm going to talk with each of you, because I don't ever come in, for me personally, and any lawyer who does this should never come in with like a preconceived, this is how it should be. There's no one size fits all. Everything is different. The psychology is completely different for each family dynamic. And so I'll come in and I'll meet with each group, talk to them one-on-one, ask a lot of questions, try to figure out where there's common ground, try to figure out where the pain point's going to be. But in that conversation, if I think a certain family unit or a certain individual needs to be steered somewhere, I will kind of take that laboring oar of trying to lead the horse to water, so to speak. And my experience has been me serving as that intermediary. A, it takes the awkwardness out. B, it takes the defensiveness out. And really, I think when people hear it from a professional, people think, okay, maybe there is something to this. So having those one-on-ones is really, really important. In prior generations, especially lawyers were not concerned about psychology. And I'm not a psychologist. I didn't study that. But it's just especially in farm planning, it's just part of the deal. I mean, it really is. You're talking generations of family history and family dynamics. So you just got to factor it in. And farmers are, again, not emotional people. They're not generally expressive people. They're certainly not people who like to talk about their feelings. But there's 3 C's that are important when we're talking about planning. It's good counsel, good communication, but in that communication, candor, the willingness to actually speak your mind and the willingness to say what you're feeling. Because you're just going through the motions, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So that's a very long-winded way to say, how do we get there One way is taking the time to talk to all the players privately, to get their feedback, to allow them to be heard, but to then to be able to take all of that feedback and collectively kind of say, all right, how do I, as the practitioner here, how do I navigate all this, and how do I get all of them to navigate to where we need to be?
So in some of those scenarios, there almost has to be a point of omission of saying, okay, as maybe that parent, I'm going to say the words out loud. I'm going to recognize that my kid that I've been protecting for so many years is not the right one to take over this business. How important is that step? It's kind of like the first step is admitting there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the first step, yeah, you got to admit your kid's a nincompoop. And obviously, I'm being, insensitive. But yes, usually the way I approach it, because I come into the meeting, I generally have enough knowledge of the dynamic to just understand, okay, this is an issue we're going to have to overcome. And I try to say, well, okay, what does your child do on a farm? Well, they muck stalls, they feed the calves, whatever. Well, okay, well, do they handle the finances? No. Do they handle any of the insurance? No. Do they deal with the banker? No. And I said, well, why don't they do that? Usually just that question will almost inherently, they'll say, well, he's not really good at that. And then I ask the question, well, if they're not good at it, are they going to be good at it when you hand over this place to them? Well, probably not. So, okay. Well, that's okay. I mean, not everyone's good at bookkeeping and HR and whatever. So then how are we going to make sure the farm is okay and they're okay? It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. We can provide for them and provide for the farm. And usually I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but it's usually just that back and forth, that colloquy gets us to get the door open enough for me to be able to come in and start to plant the seed of, okay, maybe this isn't going to be the right solution for the farm. So let's craft one that is, but is also fair to the child.
So that's one way that those conversations can go to really get to that point. Because you've mentioned it today, you've mentioned it other times we've sat down, Will, and had these conversations about the stalls that happen. But there's got to be stalls that happen when people don't want to admit that there's someone that doesn't
Correct.
have the capacity to be who they wish they could be for the business.
Well, and usually you never want to, as a parent, say, well, my kid isn't good at something. And when I get that impression that that's the resistance, I say, well, would your kid be the starting point guard on the basketball team or the quarterback if you were the coach? Well, no. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're bad. That doesn't mean you don't love them. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It just means they're not suited to fill that role. And that's okay. I mean, that is perfectly fine. And this is why I love working with farmers, is they very much view the farm as its own living, breathing organism. It has its own life. And so they care, in many cases, they care just as much about the future of the farm as they do about the future of their child. And so it's navigating how do we ensure the success of both of their futures. Mm-hmm. And again, sometimes you got to do a lot of really stringent planning. Sometimes it's not as complicated. Sometimes it's just you talk to the child. And again, a lot of times they're 30, 40 years old. They're not children. And what do you want? And they just say, you know what? I'd like my truck. I'd like my pay. I'd like to be able to continue to live rent-free in the house. And I'd like to be able to go out and cut hay. Okay, we can arrange that. We can make that happen. That's easy enough. And I think that's where, again, the communication, because mom and dad mistakenly believe that child has these like aspirations to run the farm and to be the boss and to go out and be buying land. And many times they don't. They're just content. And that's okay. Let's embrace that and then say, okay, but what does that mean for the farm then? And how do we deal with that?
And it's getting to the root of what people really want. And going back to the psychology part is digging that out, pulling it out, drawing it out. And I think something that tends to be so true for so many farm families. And of course, I came from one too, where you assume what someone's desires are, what someone is driven by, what they actually want, because you work alongside them.
Right.
But sometimes we really don't until those conversations, those communication, and the candor, as you mentioned too, to be honest about what that really is.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes the role that you will end up serving as part of your facilitation, right?
Correct. Exactly. It's to try to elicit the truth. And again, that's what lawyers do, mostly litigators when they're deposing someone. And I do this, it's a similar process. I'm just trying to get the information I need out of whomever I'm talking to be able to then say, okay, now I've got the data or the information I need to be able to actually do my job, which is to counsel you on the best approach for your personal objectives, their personal objectives, and the farm's long-term objectives. But without that candor, without that kind of willingness to say, this is what I want. Because I don't know how many conversations with farmers, especially they have younger children, teenagers, early 18, 19-year-olds, and they'll have 3 or 4 kids. And I'll sit around and, okay, one of the questions I always ask, all right, who are the farmers? And dad will be like, well, this one is the farmer. And the mom will be like, now, why do you say that? Why do you assume that the other one isn't a farmer? Well, he doesn't like to go out. And well, that doesn't mean he's not interested in farming. It just means maybe he's not interested in milking cows, but he's interested in agronomy. But there's that built-in assumption. But on the flip side, mom is maybe trying to assume that child wants to be a farmer when the kid doesn't want to be a farmer. And that's okay too. It is not just relying on assumptions, but it's, okay, let's just ask. Let's just talk, especially when you're dealing with adults.
And get that out. And as you talked about initially too, having those in conversations per family unit, because sometimes you may not be able to get that truth that you're striving for to draw out with a crowd, right? So I got to ask you this though, Will. So when you're in these scenarios where you've asked these questions to draw out of someone what they really want, and what they want isn't a match for their skill set.
Yep.
So for
it does
example,
happen.
It does happen. Maybe there's a story that comes to mind that you can share.
Yeah. So had one recently. It involved, it's actually 2 generations. It was a brother, an uncle, and then a nephew and a niece, husband and wife. And brother was the cousin Eddie of the bunch. And had grown up, worked on the farm, hard worker, but did not lacked the acumen, frankly, to run 1,500 acres, but 800 head dairy. It was a big operation. But his mom, thought he knew how to do it all. Dad fully recognized his deficiencies, but mom refused to recognize them. And mom would feed into his kind of idea that he's the boss. And so he had this mindset that I'm the boss. I'm older. I'm not going to be bossed around by my niece and nephew. And mom says, I'm the boss. So I'm the boss. And what happened, there were some health issues and some other things, so that really kind of sidelined him, which was probably for the best, because niece and nephew were able to just step in and really take over operational control. But in that circumstance, what it came down to was me having to really step in and, again, kind of pitch it from a different angle, where we were trying to get him to retire. It's not really retirement age, but to get him, like, had some health issues, so you go take care of your health. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a pension, just like if you worked for the railroad. You're going to get a pension, and you're never going to have to worry about money again, and you can go to your favorite place out in North Carolina and whatever. And he said, well, I'm not going to be an owner. No. You'll still be an owner. You'll still have the right to have a say on key decisions. But you've worked so hard in life. You need to retire. You go be your best you. And that worked. He felt like retirement was, he had worked hard and had health issues, and it made sense. And he liked the idea of a pension, because he had a buddy who I think worked for Burlington Northern or something, and he had a pension and retired at 55 or something. So that was an example of really not having to directly just come out and say, you're a nincompoop, you can't do this. We just spin it in a different manner that gets them feeling like they've worked hard and they've earned it and they're getting what they need, while ensuring that niece and nephew are able to come in and keep the farm going, and he's not creating problems. That's just one. I've never had one, I will say, knock on concrete or whatever that is. I've never had one where I've had to directly come out and tell the relative or the person, you are ill-suited to be an owner of this farm. and your other partners don't want you to be an owner and you're not going to be an owner. I've never had to have that conversation because we've always been able creatively to step around it. In a true Wisconsin passive-aggressive way, we just sidestep the issue. If we don't have to hurt people's feelings, if we don't have to create strife, but we can still get to the same result we want to get to, that's what we try to do.
And as you tell that story, Will, I'll just make a mention that all of your contact information is in the show notes so that those that are like, I need that.
If you just want to vent about Cousin Eddie, that's fine. You're not the only one that encounters it. And again, sometimes it's siblings, sometimes it's in-laws. A lot of times it's in-laws. Sometimes it's nieces, it's nephews, it's grandkids. It can be any dynamic. And the difficulty is always the family farm. We always want to welcome anyone who wants to work on the farm to come on the farm. And there's usually always a place for them. But owning the farm, controlling the farm, that's a very different scenario. And so we should always be welcoming to any family member who wants to come on farm and work and contribute to the legacy. But we should be guarded about who we're going to turn over the fate of the farm to. That's where it gets complicated. But sometimes we got to have difficult conversations and we got to make difficult decisions. That's business ownership, and that's what we got to do.
And of those 3 C's, need the good counsel.
That's right.
To help lead that direction.
That's
and
exactly
so
right.
Will McKinley from Menn Law. Again, your contact information is in our show notes for those that are listening.
And if you're Cousin Eddie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But you can help Cousin Eddie have a wonderful
I can get him
future.
his pension. That's right. And his truck.
All right. Well, thanks again, Will. Always great to have you here for your knowledge and your insight and the ability that you have to bring a little bit of humor to tough topics on family
That's
farm
right.
transition, succession, and just family in general
That's
from
right.
your area of expertise in agribusiness law.
Thanks for having me.